They say rock bottom has a sound, but in our house it didn't come with crashing glass or a door slammed shut. It came in the quiet hum of the refrigerator at 7:42 p.m. while I stood barefoot on cold linoleum, mentally calculating how many more days we could survive on canned beans and lukewarm tap water. 3, maybe 4 if Drew skipped lunch again. 5 if I returned the unopened bottle of wine we'd meant to open on our last anniversary. A celebration that never came. We weren't always like this. There was a time when we danced barefoot in this same kitchen, when broken eggs and burnt toast were reasons to laugh. But now, everything was measured, rationed, stretched, even our hope. It had been 6 months since Drew's back gave out, 6 months since the paycheck stopped showing up. And despite the pride he swallowed filing for assistance and the extra hours I scraped together at the school, the numbers just never added up, until a message came. I was grading papers when it lit up my phone, a number I didn't recognize. The text was short, polite, terrifying. If you're still open to discussing my previous offer, I can meet tonight. I'll bring payment. I won't come alone. I didn't reply. I didn't delete it either. I just stared at it, my thumb hovering above the screen, my heart thudding in my throat like a countdown I hadn't realized had started. Drew noticed. He didn't ask right away. He rarely did. But he always knew. The way some people know when rain's about to fall, even before the clouds show up. His voice was soft, almost a whisper. I thought we agreed not to. The sentence trailed off unfinished. Like so many of our conversations these days, heavy with meaning, empty of resolution. I looked at him. Really looked. He hadn't shaved in days. The lines on his forehead were deeper now, carved by weeks of stress and surrender. His shoulders were curled inwards, like he was bracing for the world to fall in on him. And still he looked at me like I was worth something, like he wanted to save me. Even when we both knew there was nothing left to rescue. We said no, I said quietly, because we were still hoping for a better way. I didn't say what we both knew. Hope doesn't pay for heat. Hope doesn't feed an empty fridge. He didn't reply, just lowered his gaze and nodded once. Not permission, not agreement, just surrender. That night, the silence between us was louder than the TV we left on to fill it. We sat in the same room, but on opposite sides of the couch, each of us wondering how we got here and what it would take to make it out. The message still sat on my screen, unanswered, glowing like a warning light on a car too old to fix. I didn't know what I would do. I didn't know if I'd respond, but I did know this. Something had already shifted inside me. And once something shifts, it doesn't always shift back. If you've ever stood at the edge of a decision so heavy it silenced your own voice, just know you're not alone. And sometimes it's not the answers we need. It's someone who doesn't flinch when they hear the question. When the knock finally came, it didn't startle me. It was sharp, deliberate, the kind of sound that doesn't ask for permission, only acknowledgement. I didn't look at Drew. Didn't ask if he wanted me to open the door, because the truth is we'd both answered already, in all the ways that weren't spoken. The hallway light flickered as I approached. I hadn't fixed it in months. There were too many things broken in this house, and the light was just the most honest one. I opened the door. There they were, 2 men, one older, mid-50s maybe, clean-shaven but with a trimmed gray beard. He wore a long dark coat and held a small black duffel bag like this was just a routine meeting. The other was younger, early 30s at most. His eyes didn't roam. They locked onto mine with the kind of quiet intensity that made it feel like he already knew who I was, what I'd decided, what I was willing to do. They didn't smile, didn't ask if this was still okay. There was no awkwardness. No need for icebreakers when everyone already knew the weather inside. I stepped aside. They entered. Drew didn't move from his seat at the dining table. He didn't say a word, but his silence, it felt heavier than any protest, like he had already said everything he could, and none of it had mattered. The older one, Marcus, set the duffel bag by the wall. I didn't ask what was inside, didn't want to know. There was a time in my life when I would have needed answers. Now, I just needed the lights to stay on. This way, I said. My voice didn't shake, not because I was strong, but because numbness often sounds like confidence when there's nothing left to lose. We walked down the hallway, me in front, them behind. And Drew? He followed a few steps back, close enough to witness, far enough to pretend he wasn't. The house felt smaller somehow, like the walls were listening, like every step toward the bedroom was a step away from who we used to be. I paused outside the door, not out of hesitation, but to remember what it felt like to still have a choice. Then I opened it. The room had already been prepared, not like a ritual, more like a checklist. A sheets pulled back, curtains drawn, a lights dimmed. It was all just another task on the to-do list. Feed the cat, grade math quizzes, prepare the room for strangers. I stepped in first, my feet bare, my chest tight, but my face calm, the kind of calm you practice when you're trying not to drown in public. Drew came in last. He sat in the armchair by the window. His hands rested on his knees, back straight, jaw locked. He didn't speak. He didn't leave. He just watched. And somehow, that was the part one wasn't ready for. Sometimes we don't need a villain to feel violated. Sometimes it's the silence of those who love us that cuts the deepest. And sometimes the first step across a line is made in complete silence, long before anyone ever knocks on the door. The room smelled faintly of lavender. It was the last candle I had left, burned halfway down, barely fragrant, but I lit it anyway. Somehow it felt like a kindness, even if no one would notice. When I stepped in, the air was still, like the room already knew what would happen here and had braced itself ahead of me. The curtains were drawn. The lamp on the dresser gave off a warm amber glow, soft enough to blur the lines of guilt, but not enough to hide them. I hadn't touched the bed that day, except to smooth the sheets. I had pulled them back automatically, the way you do when guests are coming. Only these weren't guests, and this wasn't hospitality. I slipped off my shoes, carefully, deliberately, like that small act of control still belonged to me. It didn't, not really, but rituals matter, even when meaning slips through the cracks. I could feel Drew behind me, his presence heavy in the corner of the room. He didn't sit on the bed. Of course he didn't. He chose the armchair, the same one where he used to read on Sunday mornings, back when mornings were slow and love was louder. Now he sat rigid, back straight, palms flat against his thighs, like a man summoned to court to witness something unspeakable, but who couldn't look away. I didn't meet his eyes, not because I didn't want to, but because I was afraid of what I'd find there. Regret, hurt, or worse, resignation. If I looked at him, really looked, I might falter, and we couldn't afford hesitation. Marcus stood by the door, calm and unreadable, his coat now folded neatly over a chair. He didn't speak, didn't direct. He waited, like someone used to moments unraveling quietly. Jace, the younger one, walked slowly toward the dresser. He removed his jacket and placed it down with precision, like he was clocking in for a shift. Everything about them felt rehearsed, measured, unnatural in how natural it seemed. I stood at the edge of the bed, frozen, not by fear, but by the weight of what was about to be undone. I wasn't thinking about morality, or shame, or consequences. I was thinking about the fridge, the bills, the note from the landlord taped to the mailbox. The silence stretched between the four of us like a fifth presence. No one filled it. No one dared. And then I sat down. Not quickly, not dramatically, just quietly. The mattress dipped beneath me. Familiar, ordinary, but this moment wasn't. I placed my hands on my lap, fingers trembling, though I tried to still them. Drew shifted in the chair behind me. I could hear the fabric of his jeans creak, the soft sound of him breathing deeper than usual. He was still here, still watching, still pretending that witnessing was the same as surviving. I stared ahead, and nothing, and suddenly, a memory floated back from before all of this. A Tuesday night, rain tapping against the window, Drew's arms around me as we danced, barefoot and offbeat in this same room, to a song neither of us remembered the name of. There was no money in that moment, no fear, just warmth. Now that same room felt colder than ever, the bed too neat, the silence too practiced, my heart too quiet. There are moments when your body is in one place, but your mind, your soul, has already left. And sometimes what hurts the most is not what happens next, but knowing you stayed still when everything inside you was begging to run. They say some decisions feel like falling, but this one felt like floating, like my feet had left the ground hours ago, and I was just now realizing the landing would never come. I don't remember who moved first. Marcus? Jace? Me? It doesn't matter. Because once something begins, something you once swore you'd never allow, it no longer belongs to you in the same way. They approached without words, not because they were heartless, but because this moment had no language, only motion, only breath. I closed my eyes, not in surrender, but because the ceiling was easier to look at than anyone else. It was familiar, unmoving, unjudging. Somewhere behind me I heard Drew shift in the chair. A small sound, but in that silence it echoed like thunder. He was still here, still holding on, still hoping perhaps that staying present meant he wasn't complicit. But silence can be its own kind of permission. The bed didn't creak, the walls didn't speak, only my thoughts did, spiraling faster than my breathing. I kept telling myself, this is for the bills. This is for the heat. This is for surviving. And yet, the voice that answered back whispered, but at what cost? There was a moment, fleeting, almost gentle, where one of them brushed my shoulder, like a stranger might brush lint from a stranger's coat. No intimacy, just contact. But even that was enough to remind me I wasn't invisible. I was here, still here, and that hurt in ways I wasn't ready for. Because numbness had become a kind of safety, and now sensation meant remembering. I didn't cry, I didn't speak, but my hands gripped the sheet beneath me like it might anchor me to something real. And when my throat caught, just once, it wasn't from pain, it was from memory, from the echo of a version of myself I had buried months ago. At one point I glanced sideways. The chair was empty. Drew was gone, and I hadn't noticed him leave. That was when something inside me broke, not like glass, but like ice cracking beneath too much weight. Quiet, irreversible, and yet the room carried on, as if nothing had changed, as if I hadn't just lost something I couldn't name. I stared at the wall. I counted the nail marks where pictures used to hang. Weddings, vacations, moments when love felt louder than fear. Now only shadows remained, faint outlines on faded paint, ghosts of joy. There are moments when your body is in one place, but your mind, your soul, has already left. And sometimes what hurts the most is not what happens next, but knowing you stayed still when everything inside you was begging to run. The room emptied long before I stood up, not physically, but emotionally, energetically, spiritually. It was like everything that had just happened had already been folded up, zipped away, and carried out with them, neatly, cleanly, like it never happened. But I knew better. I stayed there a while. The sheets beneath me were still warm, creased and twisted in a way that made them feel unfamiliar. The air smelled faintly of sweat and lavender wax, a combination I knew would haunt me. I pulled my dress off the floor, one movement at a time, not because I needed to cover myself, but because being bare felt too close to being seen, and I wasn't ready to be seen, not by myself, not by him. The mirror in the bathroom fogged as the shower ran. I stepped into the water without waiting for it to warm. It hit my skin like pins, but at least it reminded me I could still feel, that I hadn't disappeared completely. I didn't cry. Not yet. Not because I wasn't broken, but because I didn't know which part of me was still allowed to feel anything at all. When I finally stepped out, towel wrapped tight, I found Drew in the kitchen. He was standing by the sink, a coffee mug in his hand, but nothing in it, just holding it, like maybe pretending to pour something was easier than holding a real conversation. He didn't turn when I entered, didn't speak right away. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator, still mocking us, with its indifferent rhythm. After a moment his voice came quiet but heavy. "How much did they give you?" I stood still. There was no ceremony to this part, no pretense left to protect. 6,000, I answered. He nodded. Just once. Did it help? My throat tightened. My mouth opened, then closed again. There was no honest answer to that question, because money can fix lights, but not what happens when the lights go out. He finally turned to look at me. His eyes weren't angry, not sharp, just tired, and somehow that felt worse. Because when the anger dies, it means something else has settled in its place. We didn't touch, didn't cry, didn't reach for each other. There was nothing left to offer that wouldn't come wrapped in thorns. That night, we lay in the same bed, backs turned, breaths quiet, not asleep, just silent. And in that silence, something between us went cold. Not dead, not yet, but shivering. The loudest part of betrayal isn't always the act itself. Sometimes it's in the way you keep living afterward, pretending that ordinary things like folding laundry or making coffee can somehow patch the places that have split open inside you. But deep down, some fractures don't scream. They just stay, waiting, whispering, growing colder with every unsaid word. Some people think relationships end in shouting, in slammed doors, in breaking dishes, in a single decisive moment. Ours didn't. It ended in silence, the kind that settles slowly, almost politely, until you don't notice how far you've drifted, until the person beside you feels like a guest in the home you built together. After that night, we didn't talk about it. Not once, not even in the smallest way, but it lived with us. It had a seat at the table. It curled up between us in bed. It folded itself into the fabric of our routines, like it belonged there. I remember the next morning vividly, not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. I handed Drew his coffee the way I always did. Black, no sugar. He nodded, sipped, didn't meet my eyes. And in that tiny moment, I felt more naked than I had the night before. The silence wasn't cruel. It was almost careful, like we were both afraid that if we touched the truth, even accidentally, we'd unravel completely. So we kept moving. We washed the dishes, paid the bills, fed the cat, asked how each other's day was without really wanting the answer. We smiled at neighbors, answered emails, told our parents we were fine, but something inside us had shifted. And once it shifts, there's no going back. The money helped for a while. We caught up on rent, reconnected the gas, even filled the fridge again. But the price wasn't just in dollars. It came with interest we hadn't calculated, a tax on trust, a fee for closeness, a hidden charge on the softness we used to offer each other freely. Drew didn't touch me anymore, not out of cruelty, but because he didn't know how to. And I didn't ask him to, because I didn't know if I deserved it. I began folding laundry with more precision than necessary, lining up the edges of towels like neat little lies, as if order could fix something internal, as if being useful could replace being whole. He started leaving for walks in the evening. He said it helped his back. Maybe it did. But I think he just needed a reason to leave the house, even for 30 minutes, and breathe without the weight of me in the room. Sometimes I'd hear him on the porch, smoking again, a habit he'd quit years ago, quietly picked back up. He never told me, but I smelled it on his hoodie when I hugged him goodnight, the few times we still did. At night the bed felt bigger, same mattress, same sheets, but the distance between our backs, it might as well have been a highway, and neither of us had the courage to cross it. I wondered often if this was what dying slowly felt like. Not death in the body, but in the parts that made us a we. The inside jokes, the easy laughter, the tiny touches that used to mean everything, now replaced by silence, eye contact we avoided, and the eerie calm of two people who had run out of us. I wanted to ask him, "Do you still see me? Do you still want to?" But the words lodged in my throat, because I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer, and I wasn't sure I could survive it. So I pretended, every day, pretended I was fine, pretended we were okay, pretended the trade we'd made was just temporary. But inside I was unraveling, quietly, completely, like thread coming loose from a sweater you wear every day, until one day, you realize it doesn't keep you warm anymore. Some distances don't come from miles. They come from the choices we don't talk about, from the pain we choose not to name. And in the absence of words, love doesn't rage, just fades, slowly, softly, until all you have left is a silence, too loud to live with and too familiar to leave. People kept saying, "You look well, you two seem better. I'm glad things worked out." And I smiled, because it was easier than explaining that nothing had worked out. We had simply stopped falling apart in public. 3 weeks passed. The money was gone. Every dollar spent on essentials, rent, food, heat. Overdue bills that couldn't wait any longer. And on paper we were fine again. Lights on, fridge humming, receipts in drawers instead of crumpled under unpaid notices. But no one tells you that surviving and healing are not the same thing. We moved like housemates, polite, predictable. He brewed coffee. I folded laundry. He watered the plants. Called in sick less. But we didn't reach for each other. We didn't share those stray glances that used to mean, "I see you," even in the middle of chaos. Now we barely looked at all. I started staying longer at school, pretending I had work to catch up on. In truth, I just wasn't ready to come home. Home, what a strange word, when it no longer wraps itself around you. Drew stopped asking where I was, and I stopped asking how his back felt. Every sentence we spoke was wrapped in a layer of insulation, safe, quiet, surface level. There were no fights, no tears, just calm. And underneath that calm, something worse, emptiness. At night, I'd lie on my side of the bed, watching the ceiling, wondering if the silence between us had become more comforting than the truth ever was. Because at least the silence didn't expect anything. Didn't disappoint, didn't dig into places that still felt raw. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring at my reflection in store windows, wondering who that woman was. The one walking briskly, carrying groceries, answering emails, making dinner. She looked like me, but she wasn't me. She was a version of myself that I had constructed after the breaking, a quiet, functioning silhouette, a survivor. But there's a loneliness in surviving quietly, a heaviness in pretending you've made peace with something you still grieve in silence. I started journaling, small entries, 2 or 3 sentences a night. Today, I laughed at something that wasn't funny. He sat beside me, but it felt like we were across an ocean. I miss who we used to be. I miss who I used to be, and slowly I began to understand something I had resisted for weeks. We were no longer married, not in spirit. We were simply 2 people, sharing a space, splitting bills, taking turns refilling the toilet paper. And yet, I didn't leave, not because I couldn't, but because the version of me who once believed in escape had disappeared somewhere between survival and surrender. I wondered what it would take for one of us to say it out loud, to admit that love had packed its bags long ago, and all we'd done was keep sleeping next to the empty suitcase. But neither of us said anything. Not yet. Maybe because naming it would make it too real. Maybe because once something is spoken, you have to choose whether to fix it or finally let it go. Sometimes the new normal isn't better. It's just quieter. It's a life built on the remains of a storm you never fully recovered from. And in that quiet, you start to ask questions that don't always have answers. Who am I now? Who are we now? And how much longer can two strangers pretend to be a home? There wasn't a final fight. No slammed doors. No angry confessions spilled across the kitchen tiles. It ended the way most deep ruptures do, not with noise, but with absence. A Tuesday morning, light filtering through the blinds, coffee cooling untouched on the table. Drew sat across from me, reading something on his phone. I was halfway through buttering toast when I looked up and realized this isn't silence anymore. This is what's left when two people give up trying to be heard. It had been weeks since that night, and yet it never left the house. It hung in the air like invisible smoke. It settled into the cushions, into the closet with our winter coats, into the way we paused before speaking, as if afraid of setting something off that had long stopped ticking. We never said it out loud. Not what we did, not what we lost, but we felt it. Every time I walked past him and didn't reach out, every time he left the room a little sooner than before. We lived like polite strangers, sharing a bed, sharing meals, sharing the shame that neither of us dared to name. I don't know if he blamed me, and honestly I don't know if I blamed him, because it wasn't a single moment that broke us. It was 100 tiny ones. Every ignored red flag, every avoided conversation, every time we hoped that love alone would carry us, even as we stood on opposite shores. And here's the part that still hurts. We weren't bad people. We were just two good people who let fear drive for too long. And fear doesn't care about vows. It only cares about getting through today. I once thought crossing a line meant a dramatic fall, something obvious. But now I know, sometimes the moment you cross the line is quiet. It happens in silence, in inaction, in the moment you choose to look away instead of speak up. We never talked about that night again. But it lived between us, in the way his eyes no longer searched mine, in the way I no longer told him when I had nightmares, in the way we both clung to routines like they could protect us from the truth. But routine doesn't redeem, it only numbs. I thought about leaving, more than once, but where would I go? And who would I be if not the woman who tried to save a life by sacrificing something she couldn't ever reclaim? And so I stayed. We both did. Out of habit, out of exhaustion, out of fear that the silence outside this house might be louder than the one inside. But here's what I finally had to admit. We had already left each other. Long ago. The moment we stopped being honest. The moment we let survival replace connection. The moment we crossed the line and chose not to name it. If you're listening to this and thinking, I would never let it go that far, I truly hope you're right. But life has a way of testing the quietest parts of you. And sometimes the things we swore we'd never do, we do, not because we want to, but because we don't know how to survive any other way. If you've ever lived with a choice you can't name out loud, you're not broken, you're not unworthy, you're just human. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit the truth, even if no one else ever hears it but you. This story is a fictionalized account inspired by real emotional experiences. All characters and events are original creations for the purpose of storytelling.